The Kansas City Roller Warriors Land Acknowledgment Statement in support of Indigenous Peoples Day on October 12, 2020. Note: non-Indigenous people wrote and edited this document as part of our work to decolonize and educate ourselves and our league. We move in solidarity with and are deeply grateful for the decades of work and activism of local, regional, and global Indigenous activists, artists, thinkers, and elders. The Kansas City Roller Warriors, or KCRW, resides, practices, and plays games on the traditional lands stolen from the Kickapoo, Osage, Kansas Kaw, and Oceti-Sakowin peoples. This is our first land acknowledgement statement and our first move as a league towards 1. Correcting the erasure of Indigenous, First Nations, and Native peoples, 2. Recognizing and respecting their sovereignty, and 3. Showing respect to elders both past and present. We plan to make land acknowledgements at practice and at the beginning of all games, following the precedent set by the WIFTA International Championships and in solidarity with all organizations and movements which recognize and work to counteract the historical and present-day violences of colonization. As the KCRW Inclusivity Committee, we write this statement to educate ourselves and our league mates, officials, fans, board of directors, and sponsors. In addition to a land acknowledgement, we will provide informational resources and our commitment to celebrating Indigenous Peoples Day. Additionally, we are far from the first to do this work within the roller derby community and wish to highlight the work of Team Indigenous Rising. You can find more information about them at their website, Facebook page, Instagram page, and in this New York Times article. Acknowledgement is a small gesture of respect, one we understand as the beginning of KCRW's recognition of our complicity in settler colonial violence. Moving forward, we plan to engage intentionally with local tribes and Indigenous organizations with an emphasis on building sustainable relationships. More specifically, we will include local Indigenous groups and causes as the beneficiaries of our 50-50 raffle. Being featured as the recipient of the raffle will additionally provide a public platform to raise awareness through in-game announcements. We will additionally engage in conversation with local Indigenous communities and elders regarding what practices and actions are desired and most respectful. Awareness of the current existence, vibrancy, and resiliency of Indigenous peoples and communities works to counteract the myth of discovery. European colonizers did not discover America. They systematically and violently attempted to destroy pre-existing communities, land, air, and water rights, and cultures. This includes the attempted erasure of Indigenous gender identities and expressions which exist outside of the Western gender binary of man and woman. The English word two-spirit, also written as two-spirit, refers to non-binary and trans identities, gender expressions, and sexualities across Indigenous communities. Culture-specific words exist. We encourage you to do additional research. The United States government, since its inception, continued and still continues the violence of colonization through the Trail of Tears, physical, economic, and psychological warfare, the repeated willful breaking of treaties and promises, especially for capitalistic gain. For examples, please research the history of land-grant universities and the Osage oil murders. The refusal of federal medical and economic aid, especially during the COVID-19 pandemic. Please research the effects of COVID-19 on the Navajo Dene Nation. The destruction of traditional ritual sacred sites and burial grounds. See the Trump border wall threats to traditional sites. Ignorance and lack of action on the alarmingly high rates of violence and sexual assault committed against Indigenous women and the missing and murdered Indigenous women epidemic. Please research the Red Dress Project, the activism of Rosalie Fish of the Cowlitz tribe, and read The Beginning and End of Rape: Confronting Sexual Violence in Native America, a 2015 book by Sarah Deer of the Muskogee Creek Nation, and The Forced Assimilation and Abuse of the Boarding School System. Boarding schools in particular represent a time in U.S. history when Indigenous children were forcibly removed from their homes, communities, and cultures and placed in schools. At these schools, Indigenous children regularly experienced physical, emotional, and sexual violence. Boarding schools also committed cultural violence as they denied students the right to speak their native languages, use birth and family-given names, and engage in traditional rituals or ceremonies. These violences parallel those perpetrated by U.S. participation in chattel slavery and the construction of the prison industrial complex, especially in the school-to-prison pipeline. As a league, we reject national holidays which glorify Christopher Columbus, other colonizers, conquistadors, and their legacies of violence. Instead, we choose to celebrate Indigenous Peoples Day, this year on Monday, October 12, 2020, and to raise awareness of Indigenous activism, culture, resiliency, and present-day existence. The lands known as North, South, and Central America are the traditional homes of Indigenous, First Nations, and Native peoples. North America in particular is also referred to as Turtle Island, following the Lenape creation story of the Great Turtle. 574 Indian nations are federally recognized by the U.S. government, and many states also extend official recognition. However, Indigenous peoples do not need federal or state legitimacy to have their sovereignty respected by non-Indigenous peoples, groups, and sports teams, such as KCRW, who occupy their land. A deep connection to their land and the earth is central to Indigenous beliefs, ceremonies, and activism. Recent examples include #No Ban on Stolen Land, an Indigenous-led activist response to protest Trump's travel ban and to provide safety for Muslim individuals. Dene artist, activist, and scholar Melanie Yazzie started the hashtag and led protests at LAX, which then spread across the U.S., including at KC's own MCI airport. Anti-U.S. Mexico border wall activism, Indigenous-led movements to halt the construction of a border wall as proposed plans would destroy burial grounds and sacred sites, and would infringe upon and break treaties. #No Dapple and Standing Rock, an Indigenous-led, years-long land occupation and social media awareness campaign largely led by the Standing Rock Sioux tribe, with assistance from Indigenous groups across the world and allies from the Black Lives Matter movement and additional civil rights and social justice groups. Standing Rock stood in direct opposition to the proposed Dakota Access Pipeline, or DAPL, which would have destroyed traditional homelands and sacred sites, polluted water, and resulted in laborer camps which are directly linked to violence against Indigenous women. Trump reversed Obama's decision to halt the pipeline and thus pushed the pipeline through, although a U.S. District Court ordered a temporary stay of construction in August 2020. These recent movements reflect a long history of Indigenous environmental and land-based activism, including over a decade of legal battles between the Wyandot Nation and Kansas City, Kansas, regarding the rights to land just down the street from Memorial Hall. The land returned in the mid-2000s includes the 7th Street Casino and the Huron Indian Burial Grounds. The 1969 Akwesasne border crossing dispute between the Mohawk of St. Regis Reservation and Ontario, Canada, following Canada's breaking of the 1794 Jay Treaty. The 1969 documentary film, You Are on Indian Land, takes viewers inside the activist movement. You can view the film on YouTube or via the National Film Board of Canada. The 1990 Oka crisis between Mohawk peoples and the town of Oka, Quebec, Canada, following the breaking of land rights treaties for the expansion of a golf course. The 1993 documentary film Kanesatake, 270 Years of Resistance, made by famous Abenaki filmmaker Alani Obamsawin, You can view a selection of Obamsawin's work, including Kanasatake, via the National Film Board of Canada. The decades-long 1960s and 70s fish wars between the Nisqually, Puyallup, and Muckleshoot nations against Washington state over traditional fishing rights. This movement included the famous fish-ins at Frank's Landing. At the 1973 Academy Awards, Sacheen Littlefeather represented Marlon Brando and turned down the Oscar and delivered a speech in support of the Indigenous cause. The audience booed her off the stage, but her speech can be heard on YouTube. You can learn more at Native Knowledge 360. The historical devaluing of Indigenous sovereignty, humanity, and land rights necessitates our land acknowledgement. The information and context included here is not exhaustive. We encourage our league mates, officials, board of directors, fans, and sponsors to educate themselves and delve into the resources provided in this statement. While we and you may learn this history and information for the first time, please remember that this is not about discovery. Learning about and respecting Indigenous peoples is an act of decolonization. In other words, it is us intentionally acting to undo centuries of colonization, recognize our role in colonial violence, and to recognize and respect the enduring presence, rights, culture, and sovereignty of Indigenous peoples. In addition to the resources provided above, we highly recommend the following: nativeland.ca. This interactive map allows you to put in specific addresses and learn what languages are spoken there, whose land you reside or work on, and treaties related to that area. We encourage you to type in your home address and Memorial Halls, 600 North 7th Street Trafficway, Kansas City, Kansas, 66101, and to remove U.S. state borders from the map in order to reorient yourself. Review the USDAC Guide to Honoring Native Lands, linked here. Seek out media, books, film, television, radio, art, etc. by Indigenous creators. Enroll in the free Indigenous Canada course offered by the University of Alberta. Are you a fan of TikTok? Learn about these Indigenous TikTokers via a Rewire article and the Taiyu article. Watch the short documentary, Sweetheart Dancers, which profiles a two-spirit couple who compete together in powwows. Don't let your children play cowboys and Indians. Avoid Halloween costumes which mock, disrespect, or appropriate Indigenous culture or clothing. When the COVID-19 pandemic is over, take a trip to Lawrence, Kansas, and visit the Haskell Indian Nations University Museum and Culture Center. Thank you for your time.